My name is Wesley Chenault. I am interviewing Doug Johnson for the Atlanta's Unspoken Past Oral History Project. Today is November 19th, 2004. We are at the home of Doug Johnson and Bill Weaver, and the time is 2:22. Doug, if you will, please, just start with your background.
Okay, be glad to. My name's Douglas Johnson. I was born on August 29th, 1927 in a small phosphate mining town where the company owned the town. The company ran everything, and there was a town doctor. At this time, most people delivered their babies at home, and so I was delivered at home. The doctor of the town didn't believe in circumcision, and so none of the boys in Pierce, Florida were circumcised. I wasn't aware that none of them were circumcised until I was in the second grade. And they marched all the boys from school down to the doctor's office, and we all dropped our pants to be examined to see whether we needed to be circumcised. Much later in my life, when I got into college and was in a locker room, I discovered that we uncut boys of that age were in a great minority. And jumping ahead, I felt very self-conscious about being uncut. Now, many years later in my life, I began to be sort of proud of it, because these cut guys didn't know anything about all those nice sensitive nerve endings that they no longer had. Well, so much for that subject. Pierce, as I said, was a small company town that mined phosphate rock. The phosphate was used in fertilizer and in making phosphoric acid. This was long before integration. And so there was the white town with about 500 people in it, and then there was the black town with about 500 people in it, and the black town, of course, was called the Quarters. Now, I think that dates back to plantation days, probably. And of course, each town had its own schools. Pierce, Florida had a elementary, junior high school. It had 5 rooms. First and second grade were in one room, third and fourth in a room, fifth and sixth in one room, and seventh and eighth in one room, and then in the 5th room, if I've counted right, were the 9th graders who were privileged to have a room all their own. When we graduated from there, we rode the bus every school day to Mulgray, Florida, which is 4 miles away, and to go to high school. And so we were there 10, 11, and 12th grades, and I think there may have been 35 or 40 in my graduating class. I graduated from high school in June 1945. At that time, the Second World War was not completely over. The war in Europe was over, but the war with Japan was still going on. I had the option of joining one of the services or being drafted. The commonly held view then is that you were better to join something you wanted rather than be drafted into the infantry or the army. I was pretty smart in those days, and the Navy was wanting people to be radar technicians. And so before I joined, I took a test to see whether or not that I would be admitted to radar school. Well, I passed the test, and so I was inducted as Seaman First Class, which is one step up but beyond Seaman Second Class, because I was going to radar school, and I was privileged in that small way. So I went to boot camp at Great Lakes Naval Station Great Lakes Naval Training Station just a little bit north of Chicago. Well, while I was in boot camp, the atom bomb was dropped in Japan, and the war with Japan was suddenly over. Well, at that point, the Navy had no use for further radar technicians. So for the short time that I was in Chicago, the people that had been headed for radar school were put to doing office work. And I ran a addressograph machine for whatever months that was. And then they sent me to Jacksonville Naval Air Station, where they were discharging all the Navy people, and I worked more office work there again with, well, I think at that point I was running the mimeograph machine. And then I was discharged, I think, in August or September of 1946. But that much time, at that time the GI Bill was still in operation, but that much time in the Navy secured for me GI Bill for all of my undergraduate work. When I went on to college, there were so many veterans coming back that the universities had to find some way to put them through quickly. So there was this series of tests referred to USAFI tests, United States Armed Forces Institute tests, to see who could get advanced credit. Well, I passed all of those. So then suddenly I had 1 year of college credit without doing anything, and the GI Bill covered the other 3 years. I went on to graduate school, staying at University of Florida, got a master's degree in pharmacology, got a PhD degree in pharmacology, and then was out looking for a job teaching in a college of pharmacy. Now there's a lot of stuff that I've left out here. Let's see. Well, I'll divide it up into two series right now. I grew up during the Great Depression. The 1930s were the Great Depression. And my father never lost his job with the mining company, but he did work 2 days a week for a long time. And we squeaked by on that. I never knew that we were poor, but I do know how rare it was to be given a nickel to buy, you know, a little cup of ice cream or anything like that. And I remember all the macaroni and cheese meals and the beef tongue meals and other things that, you know, it was good food, but it was not upscale, shall we say. This was, of course, long before television. We did have radio, and we did have a newspaper delivered daily, the Tampa Tribune, which was considered far superior to the Lakeland Ledger, which was a little town maybe 16 miles away. Tampa was 40 miles away. As kids, well, the radio at that time had all of these night, I guess, would now be called soap operas, but, you know, the ones for the kids, Dick Tracy and, Jack Armstrong, the All-American Boy. Then the ones that you'd also listen to also, Amos and Andy and Lum and Abner and things of that sort. But in the newspapers and on the broadcast media, the word homosexual did not appear. So I grew up totally ignorant of that word or what it meant or anybody that might apply to. And that went on all the way through high school. I didn't hear anything about homosexuality until I was in the Navy. And of course there's all sorts of raunchy talk going on in a military barracks, and so yes, I heard about that. I knew that ever since puberty I had had same-sex erotic fantasies, but I assumed that all boys my age had same-sex erotic fantasies. Now, all the other boys, when they grew up, got married and were straight, and so I assumed that when I grew up, I would be straight, and if I just waited, it would happen. So we flash back to the Navy, and it was in the spring of '46, I think. I was at Jacksonville Naval Air Station. I was interested in music and taking piano lessons as a kid. I was fascinated with the organ, although I'd never had any experience playing the organ. But one day at the Naval Air Station, I walked by an auditorium that had a Hammond organ in it, and there was a Navy lieutenant playing the Hammond organ. So I went in because I was fascinated with the organ, sat on the front row and listened for quite a long time. And I think he took it as some sort of message. But anyway, pretty soon I heard myself propositioned, and I decided, well, maybe it's time to see what these same-sex erotic fantasies are. Now, all we did was go up behind the stage curtains, and it was a little mutual masturbation session. But when we parted, he said something that just tore my naive, unexperienced mind apart. He said, "Someday you make somebody a good wife." And I was horrified, and I swore to be celibate until I grew up. And somehow I naively convinced myself I would be grown when I graduated from college. Well, of course, I went to graduate school, so I was 26 when I graduated from college, and it only took about a month to discover that nothing at all had changed.
Were you dating women during this time?
Oh no, I didn't date. I was forced. Well, in junior high school, football was a big thing, and there was something king and queen of whatever the year, homecoming or something like that, and I was forced to be a date to a girl who was going to be queen, and I resisted terribly, but I ended up doing it. Let's see, where are we back? Well, to start another little approach here. When I went to college, I was interested in the organ, so I started taking organ lessons from the university organist. And it wasn't but a month or two into that till there was an organ recital in Jacksonville that he was going to, and so I went with him to Jacksonville. Now, another student of his was a high school student in Jacksonville named Bill Weaver. And the Weaver family had already invited the organ teacher to dinner that night, and he took me along, uninvited guest, to dinner. So that was the first time I met Bill Weaver. He was headed to Gainesville, to the University of Florida, in a couple of months in the fall. And so when he got to the university, we knew each other slightly, and we were both taking organ lessons, and so we became friends. And we were friends all the way through 1951, when he got his bachelor's degree and went off to graduate school. And in '51, I got my master's degree, and of course stayed at University of Florida. Now, looking back on that period, I think it's fair to say that Bill and I were platonic soulmates during that few years. We ate in the university cafeteria together, we went to movies together. In 1948, we took a Christmas trip to New York City together, semi-chaperoned by our organ teacher. Well, we didn't do anything. I don't know what he did. But we saw our first Broadway shows. We visited a lot of the famous churches and organs there. Our clothes and shoes were totally unprepared for slushy, snowy, icy, rainy weather. And we did not have any overshoes to put over our shoes, and so as the week went by, our shoes were really soaked with water. We were at Times Square on New Year's Eve and saw the ball drop. And then after that, we went to a party in wicked Greenwich Village, or so we thought, to which our organ teacher chaperone had been invited. The crowd were, of course, people much older than we were. Our shoes were wet, so we took our shoes off and they put them in the oven of the stove to dry out while we were there. Now, it was years later before we realized that that was a gay party. But nothing untoward had happened that night, and I can't even remember anything. I can't even remember whether we had a good time or not. Anyway, that was something that we had done together. That was special. We had vacationed together. We visited each other's families. We engineered it that the two sets of parents would meet, and I think the parents were a little uneasy, but everything went all right. So, as I say, we were soulmates, and but no hacky-packy. And I think our other friends realized that there was some special relationship between the two of us. Bill during college knew he was gay, and before he left, I was aware he was gay because I read one of the letters in his desk that I shouldn't have. But I was still in college. I was waiting to grow up, so nothing was happening. So we both, from 51 to 52, we were both still in graduate school, him in Rochester, New York, me in Gainesville. We exchanged a few letters then, mostly about musical programs we had been to and things of that sort. Well, when I got a doctorate in 53 and began looking for a job at a college of pharmacy, which is not entirely easy. There are not that many colleges of pharmacy in the United States. Most states have only one college of pharmacy. Georgia was an exception that there were two. There was University of Georgia in Athens and Southern College of Pharmacy in Atlanta, which in later years became Mercer University College of Pharmacy. So I took a job teaching pharmacology at Southern College of Pharmacy in Atlanta, and this was in February '53. And the month or two went by, and I decided that I was gay. Then
What led up to that?
not much. Well, to be specific, there was a senior student and his wife who were trying to matchmake, and so they set me up for a date with I won't call her a girl because she was about 5 years older than me. And we sort of double dated, and then she was the one that was the aggressor in starting some necking and kissing, to which I had no response whatsoever. So it was after that that I decided, well, here I am gay, let's deal with it. I was aware, somehow I learned that there was an organist choirmaster job open at Holy Trinity Church in Decatur, and so I contacted Bill and said, well, here's a job opening, you're ready to find a job, why don't you come apply? And I can't remember well, I don't think we discussed it on the telephone because people didn't use long-distance telephone back then unless it was an emergency, so I think it probably was by correspondence that if he came to Atlanta and if he got the job, we would move in together, and since I now realized that I was gay, we would be a gay couple. Now, the idea of a gay partnership having any lasting time was totally unknown then. any idea that a gay relationship could be monogamous was, well, of course, that was impossible. All gays were promiscuous, so everybody thought. But we did move into an apartment. It was a upstairs garage apartment behind a house on 7th Street. It was unfurnished, so we had to scrape around and get a few things. We had a Samsonite card table with 2 chairs that we ate off of. Let's see. In the 6 months before we got together, I had bought some hi-fi equipment. The basic hi-fi stuff came out while we were in college, but when I got to Atlanta in February '53, there were 2 firms here that were the very first ones to be really hi-fi dealers. Harry Baker, and his shop was in a coach house behind a mansion to the east of Rhodes Square, Rhodes Center, whatever it is. And the other one was the man that just died last week, Lee Kramer, who had a shop at Peachtree and North Avenue. Lee Kramer was from Egypt, and he was a bristly personality. And I don't know how he got the nickname, but a lot of people call him the Laughing Egyptian. I ended up buying hi-fi equipment, the very first hi-fi equipment, some of it from both places. Of course, that was mono entirely. So that took up part of the living room. I think we had 1 upholstered chair. The bedroom was adjacent to the living room, where you could see into it from the living room. So, you know, we were perfectly aware that we had to be closeted, and so it would be a disaster to get a double bed. So we bought 2 of the cheapest possible single beds. The rest of the bedroom furniture was unfinished wood, well, a chest of drawers and a nightstand, which we painted black. The first signs of what, gay sensitivity, perhaps. Well, see, back then we had had no introduction to the gay society in Atlanta. All the friends we knew about were going to be straight. We wanted to be able to have friends in, and so we had to make a presentable appearance. And then there was a small bathroom with a tub, no shower. Let's see where that goes. Well, before that first year was out, well, when we were living on 7th Street, we both used public transportation. I caught the gasoline bus downtown and finished walking to the College of Pharmacy. Bill was working in Decatur, and so he walked from 7th Street up to Ponce de Leon and caught what was then called the trackless trolley. It had rubber wheels, and it had prongs in the back that reached up to touch 2 electric wires. And that took him directly to where he wanted to go in Decatur, but it was long walk. So he decided he needed better transportation, so he bought a motor scooter. And he hadn't had it a month before he had a car wreck and broke his ankle. So he was in a cast for 7 or 8 months, and he continued to do his organ work at church, playing 1-footed rather than 2, and part of the time, I guess, no feet at all. Bill is the economical one of our relationship. And here we were paying, I want to come back to the furnishing of the apartment. Because this is something that doesn't exist anymore. The one thing we did that was high-class decor is we went to Sears and Roebuck and bought some paper drapes. And I don't think you can buy paper drapes anymore, but we had beautiful paper drapes in our living room. Well, let's see, where did I leave off? Oh, after a year, Bill was unhappy with us spending rent that would be down the drain. We ought to buy a house. And we both knew that I was eligible for a GI loan, which would allow you to buy a house, I think with, all you had to have was a 10% down payment or something like that. The whole 90% of it could go into the loan. So we looked around and we found this development south of Decatur, at the corner of Memorial Drive from Atlanta and Columbia Drive coming out of Decatur. And this was a development called Belvedere Park. Now, the developer was putting up these small houses from 1,000 to 1,200 square feet. And this was to provide housing for all these veterans coming back. They had come back long enough to get college degrees and they were now ready to start careers. So we bought one of these houses, one of the artier ones, and there were a few, and we fit right into the neighborhood. This was a time when the word homosexuality was still never mentioned anywhere, and you never heard it, and neither gays or straights heard it, and as long as you were in the closet and behaved yourself, you were assumed to be straight. And certainly if we were in our early 20s, there was no reason to suspect anything otherwise. The point is that we fit in very well with the neighborhood. That we were all the same age. We were all furnishing a house for the first time. We were all starting lawns for the first time. They, of course, were starting families, and we weren't. We were neighbors up and down the street with people, and then there were two families that we were close neighbors with. A few houses down on our side was an architect and his wife, and across from them was the principal cellist with the Atlanta Symphony. And so they too, and we consider ourselves the arty street, the arty set on Monterey Drive. And we would, have meals with each other. We became particularly close friends with the architect and his wife. And we reached the point where we were exchanging Sunday night supper routinely. And that's when we all started to learn to drink. I think in the beginning, all of us would have one drink, and that was that. Well, of course, we all escalated from that as time went by. When we got to Belvedere, that was maybe 3, 4, 5 miles from Decatur. A bus from Atlanta came right to our corner. I only had to walk half a block to catch the bus to go downtown to my job at the College of Pharmacy. But at that point, there was no transportation into Decatur, and so we had to have an automobile. And not having much money, we bought a used 4-door Chevrolet for $600. And Bill drove that to Decatur, and I got the bus downtown. Let's see, where does that lead us to? Oh, well, I guess this has not too much to do with gay life, but we had an older friend who, well, he was in his 60s, I think, who was organist choir master of All Saints Church downtown. And he became a close friend, and he was addicted to sedatives, and he was dopey in the morning. And so Bill called him up every morning to wake him up and get him started on the day. In 1957, he had a heart attack and died, and at that point we bought his car to replace the Chevrolet that we had had earlier. Bill also inherited his wristwatch, which we still have here at home. Well, the only reason is because the case is solid 14 karat gold and it doesn't run anymore. But by that time we were integrated into the musical and organ activities of the city of Atlanta, and both of us were active in that. In 1960, Bill was elected subdean of the Atlanta chapter of American Guild of Organists, that's equivalent to vice president, and I was elected treasurer. After he served 2 years as sub-dean, then he was elected as dean. And I was re-elected as treasurer, and in fact I continued to be treasurer for 30 years until 1990. During Bill's tenure as president of the American Guild of Organists, he was instrumental in having the chapter integrate. 60s were the times for integration, and black organists in Atlanta were permitted to join the white Atlanta chapter. Previous to that time, black organists in Atlanta had been forced to be members of the New York chapter. Well, how that came about is that a black organist who was a graduate of Syracuse University and had just as good an education as any other organist in town took the job of organist at Clark College. And we got to know him, and of course he was gay like most organists. And on a personal level, and it was just a misfortune that a person of this caliber and education should be excluded from the Atlanta chapter. So it wasn't easy for Bill because there were a lot of really old members of the chapter who got up and made, speeches against it. But when the vote came, it passed. The black organist's name was Franklin Bernard Hunter. We called him Bernie, although his black colleagues called him Bernard. He was the first black person we ever invited to our home for dinner in Belvedere. He drove out in his car, and when he got there, he said he'd been stopped by the police and asked what he was doing driving in a white neighborhood. Things were difficult in those days. He later got the job as organist at Fisk University, which is a big advancement. And then later he died of AIDS. Let's see. In 1966, the National Convention of the American Guild of Organists was in Atlanta. Bill was appointed to be general chairman of the convention, that is the head honcho. I was going to be convention treasurer. That was extra job to chapter treasurer. We had 1,200 people here, big success. We turned over $80,000 and ended up, I think, with $7,000 left over for all our hard work. I've skipped something. In 1960, Bill changed jobs to move to be organist choirmaster of St. Anne's Episcopal Church in northwest Atlanta. This was a wonderful opportunity for him. It was a new church, they were building a new building. That is the wealthier side of town. There was money involved, and they came to him and says, "What can we do to get you?" And he says, "Build a reverberant church and buy a Flintrop organ from Holland." At that time, the idea that tracker action, that is mechanical action organs built on the lines of the great historical organs in Europe, was the coming thing. And Flintrop was a builder in Zondheim, Holland, and built that sort of instrument. This was the sort of instrument that E. Power Biggs had installed at Cambridge, recorded on it. He had played in Atlanta, we had visited him, he had recommended. And so Bill went to St. Anne's in 1960. They were meeting in an old school building at that point, but this is unusual, they contracted for the building and the organ at the same time. They were, separate contracts. So it was in 1966 that the building was complete and the organ was complete, and a miracle had happened, so Bill thought. Well, it's not too many organists that are able to be in on the development of the right acoustics and the proper instrument and that sort of thing. I was singing in the choir all those times, both in Decatur and then later at St. Anne's. Well, that was, 60s when he moved. 66 is when he changed jobs. In 63, Southern College of Pharmacy, which was a private school, well, actually it was part of Mercer at that point, but Mercer wasn't putting any money into it. Southern College of Pharmacy announced that it was closing. And I decided it was time to find myself another job. And as I said before, there are not very many colleges of pharmacy and only one other in the state. So I applied to the University of Georgia and was hired on as the second pharmacologist teaching there. Well, there was no way I could live in Atlanta and be anywhere responsible for the job in Athens. The university had some classes met at 7:50 in the morning. There's no way for me, the sleepyhead that I am, get up and drive to Athens and get there in time for 7:50. So we knew in the beginning I would have to have an apartment in Athens, and so found the apartment at 480 South Village Avenue, apartment B2. I drove over to Athens on Monday morning, unless I had a 7:50 class, in which case I drove to Athens Sunday night. And I came back to Atlanta on Friday at the end of the day on Friday. The hour it took to drive back and forth was not wasted time. The hour it took to drive to Athens, I changed gear from being a social person in Atlanta to being an academic person in Athens, planned the day, planned my week, and that sort of thing. The drive back on Friday afternoon, I shifted gear again to the social person here, and the social activities that Bill had together took place on weekends. Now, we did talk to each other daily by telephone. In the beginning, we had to pay long distance. Let's see. And usually Bill would call me and the phone would wake me up. Eventually, the whole state government, including the universities, put in this telephone system where from a university office you could call over the state. Now, it wasn't supposed to be used for personal calls, but I did use it for one personal call a day. That was probably that was after Stonewall that the telephone system went in. But we did talk every day. We were lonely during the week. When I got home on Friday night, both of us wanted to lean on the other one. And neither of us wanted to be leaned on. So relationship was fairly rocky on Friday nights, and then Saturday and Sunday were very good. Bill was a wonderful cook and enjoyed doing it. And I think what I left out about the 50s in Atlanta is that there were no public places for gays to meet. And so the gay entertainment was done in homes. If you were gifted in the kitchen as he was, you had frequent dinner parties. If you were not gifted in the kitchen, you had an annual catered cocktail party to discharge your social obligations. And it was in these home meetings that you met other gay people, because sometimes friends would bring friends and that sort of thing. Well, let's see, back to 63 and me in Athens. I continued to work at the university, at the College of Pharmacy for 27 years, finally retiring in 1990 when I was 63 years old. Well, in retrospect, Bill and I had been together 10 years before I went to Athens. The hard time in a relationship is, in retrospect, is somewhere between 7 and 10 years where, the first blossom of sex is sort of worn off, and you wonder where that's going. And the level of companionship and the draw of that has not been fully established, and so you don't know. Now, what I know now and what I've advised other people is if you're in that stage, just wait. Companionship will pick up. Companionship is being everything you do besides sex. You know, movies, books, theater, politics, religion if you're into that. And pretty soon the two of you have common views of all of those things. And, well, all the jokes are commonly known. And so when we have company and there are people that have heard some of these wonderful old jokes, one of us will put the other one up to telling it. Well, let's see. So companionship went out and we stayed together. Now, 2 weeks from now, we will celebrate our 51st anniversary together. Now, what can I go to back before Stonewall?
Well, you were having social parties as means to engage with other
Well, as I
people.
said, we had dinner parties, and because we enjoyed it, we enjoyed our friends, and we enjoyed doing it. And we continued doing that up right until we got a few years ago, when we're so old that Bill doesn't cook anymore. And, well, it's just some things gays do now. If you go out with gays, you go to a restaurant these days. Let's see, anniversaries, let's see. 25th anniversary would have been after 69. Well, how long did it take before we knew we were going to be a permanent couple? Well, about that 10 years. And then when in 1961, okay, this is getting back to the right time frame, our architect family down the street, well, they aspired to be country squires, so to speak, and to have horses, and she was already raising champion collies, and they wanted a dog kennel and that sort of thing. So they looked around for property where that was possible, and they located a tract on Spalding Drive, an undeveloped area on Spalding Drive, where there were 3 lots in a row, and they bought 3 acres, and they suggested, since we were good friends, that we buy the 2 acres next to them. And that at that time I was still in Atlanta, and we had no detailed future plans, but it was a beautiful lot, and it was available for $3,500 for 2.2 acres. And so we bought it with a loan from the owner. The loan was something like $35 a month or something like that, very easy. And by 1961, the lot was paid for. The architect neighbors built a house on their lot about 1964. This was shortly after I went to Athens. Okay. I think the turning point in knowing that we were permanently together is when we decided to build a house on the lot next door to our architect neighbors. And that building went up, I think, during '65, and we moved in the fall of '66. Well, I think we would not have made that kind of investment if there was any doubt in our minds that we were not going to be a permanent couple. Of course, we sold the house in south of Decatur. I think got 12. Well, it had cost $11,000. I think we maybe got 12 for it. And so, with our equity out of that and a $25,000 loan, we built the house on this property. And I think even at this point, Well, we eventually air conditioned and we put in a paved driveway and we finished up a room in the basement, I think. But in a total investment in $1966 is only about $50,000. We just recently sold the house because we're going to a retirement home and we got $440,000 for it. Now, inflation-wise, it's not that big a pot of gold, but it's the money that'll get us into the home and pay for the lifetime lease and that sort of thing. But it's a brick house, of course, with wooden trim, and we had the contractor put the prime coat on the outside trim, and then we painted the whole thing ourselves. And we painted the whole interior ourselves. Well, of course, we were young and plenty of energy back in those days. But, you know, we worked together to produce all of this. Is this getting too long?
No, I just want to check the tape though to make sure that I'm not running out of tape on this side. I'm going to pause, just go ahead and flip the tape so we're...
Okay.
Let me just change both of them.
It's such an abrupt...
We are continuing the interview.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Is it going?
It is going.
It is going. Well, let's start out with something else because Wesley has brought it to mind again. Here in our 51st year together, we're being interviewed by Atlanta Magazine in preparation for their February 2005 issue, February being the Valentine issue. That issue of the magazine will be devoted to romance, young romance, middle-aged romance, old-age romance, straight romance, gay romance. We have been invited to fill the old gay slot. So, we have now been interviewed 4 times by a reporter from the Atlanta Magazine, and he's actually has gotten all the information and is writing the article right now. We had emailed him for yesterday to ask, did we want to be referred to as gay or queer? So I emailed him back, and what I sent him was more than he was asking for. He wanted yes or no for either of them. I gave him sort of a history of our experience with gay terminology. When we were at the University of Florida, and still naive and innocent, we heard a couple of guys use the word YAG, Y-A-G. And so we had to ask what YAG was. Well, it's backwards of gay and a code word for gay, but gay is such a terrible word you wouldn't say it out loud. But that's what older homosexuals call themselves now. Okay, we were informed. Well, as time went by, gay came to be known to just about all homosexual people. We knew it, and it was the nice word, the nicer word we used for ourselves. Now, the put-down word from the homophobic straights was either queer or faggot. I guess those were the two, but gays didn't use those then. Then along came Stonewall, and at that point, gay became known to the general population, gay and straight. And so gay was added to the put-down terminology of the homophobic straights, along with queer and faggot. And that went along for a while, and then eventually the New York Times started using the word gay when they were reporting homosexual news events. Well, once the high-class New York Times was using gay in a non-pejorative way, then the general population started using it in a non-pejorative way. Well, this offended the older militant homosexuals, and so they decided to use queer as a statement of pride. Well, that's not too many years ago, long after Stonewall. But anyway, the early part of that, the YAG stuff, I think is seems very quaint at this point. Oh,
Would you mind talking some about what you saw? Could you describe Atlanta and its gay life in the late 50s and 60s?
okay. First thing to say is that Atlanta was compared to now, Atlanta was very small in 1953. There were no shopping malls anywhere. Everything that took place in Atlanta took place in the downtown area. The banks were downtown, the theaters were downtown. There was the Riches and the Davisons, which eventually became Macy's, and then was Rich's Macy's, and now they're about to drop Macy's. But if you shopped, you went downtown to shop. You went downtown to the restaurants. You went downtown to the movies, and the Fox was there then, and that's a little bit out of town, but right in the downtown area were Lowe's Grand and the Paramount, and also the Roxy, which was another, I think they called them scenic theaters like the Fox, and it was pretty run down, but at one time it had the old pipe organ in it just like the Fox still has today. Let's see. I don't suppose there's any point in naming restaurants or locations. I don't know where to pick up. Well, okay, I'll say that. I'll go back to what gay life was then. To the best of our knowledge, there was only one gay bar in Atlanta in 1953. And that was Ms. P's, which was on Postulin, just west of the Sears Roebuck building, which is now City Hall East. The Sears Roebuck building had retail floor on the main level, and then the top 4 or 5 floors were the storehouse to fill all the catalog orders for the entire southeastern United States. Well, that meant that there were a lot of Sears employees that needed a place to eat lunch. And so Ms. P's was a straight lunch place at noon, but became a gay bar at night. Now, for those of us who had careers in straight mainline professions, which included Bill and me both, we wouldn't go to Ms. P's. I think Bill has been there once or twice. He's a little more adventuresome than me. But people with mainline careers generally didn't go there because those places were raided, and that ended up with your name in the paper and immediate firing. Now that brings a subject I want to talk about later, when a friend of ours was fired for exactly that. And as I said before, the question comes up, well, where did you meet? Well, at homes, and a friend of a friend, and that sort of thing. Now, of course, there were cruising spots. And those were generally men's restrooms here and there. Department stores, bus station, Sears, whatever. But those weren't friend material. Or maybe even a street corner. So, when did there start to be gay activities? Well, some of them were not officially gay to start with. I think the first thing I remember is back in those early days when downtown was the only place that on Halloween they closed Peachtree and I think Forsyth from Ellis down to wherever Rich's was to traffic. And on Halloween night there was this great parade of people in costumes, all ages, adults, children, and of course many cross-dressers, which you could identify with all these big people wobbling on high heels. And of course, in addition to the paraders, there were the people that came to watch. I don't think I've ever seen that in print since then. And of course, it doesn't happen anymore. Well, there's gay pride that takes place, I suppose. Oh, let's see. I think social life for gays before Stonewall was pretty circumspect. Now, we'll say some more about this having to be in the closet so completely, and leading all the straights to think that you were also straight. That meant that if there was any problem that you needed to go to a professional, you couldn't be honest. You couldn't be honest with your doctor, you couldn't be honest with your dentist, you couldn't be honest with your lawyer, you couldn't be honest with your minister. You were playing a role in every aspect of life that, I don't think gays to know have any notion of how strict it was. Well, getting back to people who are outed being fired. We had a friend who was in his 40s, and he was one of the top salesmen at one of the men's clothing stores in the very early days of Lenox Square, when it was an outdoor mall. And he had formed what was, I guess, it turned out to be truly an unhealthy alliance. He had a boyfriend who was a college-age student. And we met them both at the same time. And then the student went to the University of Georgia and decided he wasn't happy with his middle-aged friend, partner, lover, whatever. Now, Bill and I disagree on what happened at that point. My recollection is that this boy called the manager of the clothing store and outed our friend. Bill thinks the boy went and spoke to him directly, but that's beside the point. The manager learned it and he fired our friend within a half hour. And an hour from there, our friend appeared on our doorstep, white with panic and not knowing what to do. And we invited him and gave him a drink to calm him down. We fed him supper. We put him up for the night. And the next morning he left. He had calmed down, but he was aware that he was going to have to start an entire new career. How that eventually turned out, we had a gay friend who ran a small printing company, and the fired guy got a job with the printing company and was there for, I don't know, 10, 15 years maybe. And we've lost touch with him now. But the business of being fired on the spot is not fiction. And this would have been very close to the time of Stonewall, because the house he came to for our help was this house, which was built in '66. So it was immediately after that, or very shortly after that. So, when the Atlanta Magazine reporter asked us whether we wanted to be called a gay or queer, we said gay without hesitation. The word queer brings up all that horrible stuff back in the 50s and 60s. And besides, we're on the side of New York Times. Whatever. Well, we have been out of the closet, I guess, for 20 years now. And we have many, many straight friends, and we're in gay straight discussion groups, and the words used by gays and straights equally, and it's a comfortable word for everybody. So, it is. It doesn't sound quite so rough as some of the others. Well,
and during the 50s and the 60s, You're having house parties, and that's your main way of socializing. Were you concerned with police surveillance then?
Oh no, well, house parties were mostly on vacations back in the 50s and 60s. A group of gays would go to West Florida Panhandle Beach and run a house.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, there'd be bedrooms for all the couples and this, that, and the other. And we went there a couple of times with gay friends from New Orleans. We had friends there who were brother and sister who were both homosexual. And so they had partners, and so we had gay couples and that lesbian couple, and we were a gay couple. New Orleans people are all good cooks. And so they had planned the food for the whole week, had bought the staples and brought them with them, and we had these New Orleans gourmet meals all week long. And the house was right on the Gulf, and if it wasn't a holiday weekend, you could go out to swim and nobody in any direction. So that's where we got our ideas that a gay beach party was a pleasant way to spend with friends. So, and years later, we would rent a house at Folly Beach outside of Charleston, and we would have friends from various places across the country, not just the Southeast, would come down and stay there. And sometimes we were overcrowded, and some of them had to sleep on air mattresses and that sort of thing. Let's see, and that happened a couple of times. When it ended, we were there one night when the electricity went off, and somebody walked through a screen door not seeing it there. Nothing was said about paying for repairs or anything like that. But the next year, when we wanted to rent a house from the same realty agent, they just said, "Oh, we don't allow house parties." So that was that. Now, we have friends in Atlanta who owned a park share in a beach house at Hunting Island outside of Beaufort, South Carolina. And Hunting Island is now a state park. But at the time it became a state park, there were people that owned houses in the property, and they were allowed to keep those properties privately. So our friend's cabin was actually inside a state park, and the state park was locked up at night, chain and padlock across the gate to get into the park, so you couldn't stay out late. But we had friends from all over the country there, and it was more primitive than the one at Folly Beach, but you see, even the local people, you see them in a different way when you're with them 24 hours a day and changing into bathing suits and seeing what each of you have got, which you don't normally do with close friends, even if you're all gay. It was a wonderful house. There have been several hurricanes since then. The sand in front of the house is eroded badly, and then South Carolina passed a law that any house built on beach had to be so far back from the water line. Well, the water came up under the house that we had been to, and there was no place on the lot to move it back, so it eventually just had to be torn down. But the last time we were there, the waves were coming up under the front porch. So, of course, we were never there during a hurricane.
Good.
But, so we had those good times together. In more recent years, of course, this is after Stonewall, we have friends in town, straight friends, that have cabins in scenic places. State of Maine, Upper Vermont, southwestern Colorado, and we've had well, I wouldn't call it a house party because it's usually only just 2 or 3 couples going to those, but that's sort of well, it's sort of resurrection of the old idea of a house party. And when we go to a house party now, of course, we're not as young and well, we're not as young and what is the word? Frisky as we once were, but it's still very satisfying.
I'd like to ask you if you could describe the relationship that you saw between gay men and lesbians during
Oh, well,
Atlanta
okay,
in the 50s
so this
and
brings
60s.
in another thing. Up until we went to the Florida beach with the New Orleans people, which included a lesbian couple, those were the first lesbians we'd ever seen socialize with. And basically in that early 50s and early 60s in Atlanta, gays and lesbians went their separate ways. Well, we're comfortable with lesbians. But still, most of our friends homosexual friends have been gay. Now, you may repeat the story about the lesbian and gay couple in New Orleans. Yeah, that goes back to even earlier than the 60s, because I think they told it at the beach. Brother and sister were both homosexuals, both had partners, and they frequently got together maybe once a week to play bridge. And of course, it was pretty much a family relationship all the way around. And so they tell this story many years later that at one time they started talking about what gay men did together in bed and what lesbian women did together in bed. And after all that discussion was over, one of the lesbians said to one of the men, "I don't think I'm ever going to kiss you again." And he said back to her, "And I'm not going to shake your hand." Well, the point was that gays and lesbians, at that time, there was no contact in Atlanta, were fully social with each other. Well, New Orleans is exceptional in many ways.
Yes.
And Lord, loads of gay bars even back then. And, we would drive to New Orleans to stay with our friends there. Well, that's an unusual relationship. The two guys still lived at home, where they had elderly, sickly parents. But they owned an apartment down in the quarter, where they went to be by themselves and to socialize. And so whenever we went to visit, we had an apartment in the quarter to stay at. And Lord knows it was a ramshackle building with, tilting floors. But it was shelter and it was socially proper. So, well, I can't remember when they sold it. I guess it was when both sets of parents had passed away, and the two guys wanted to move in together, and the apartment in the quarter was not something you'd want to live in permanently. So they bought a big old house on Napoleon Avenue, which is a couple of blocks away from the Garden District. And then when we go to visit there, we stay with them in upscale. Well, the house is, I guess, now 100 years old, but it was maybe 75 years old or 80 when we were there. But as a result of that, we've seen a side of New Orleans that a lot of people don't see. Of course, the ones that go to Mardi Gras and stay right down in the quarter have seen a side that we have not seen because we've never been there for Mardi Gras. But we have seen the TV tapes of our friends.
Would you talk about the role religion has played in your life?
Okay, religion. Well, we were both brought up in Baptist families, and Baptists go to church, and In those days, as I said, homosexuality was not a word anybody ever used, or gays and straights alike that we knew seemed to be oblivious of the situation. So we never heard ranting sermons or anything like that. In college, I joined First Baptist Church in Gainesville, where my organ teacher was the organist. Then when I came to Atlanta in '53, I joined First Baptist Church of Atlanta, but didn't go. Then Bill came to town to be organist of an Episcopal church in Decatur, and I started singing in the choir there, so I abandoned my childish ways and joined the Episcopal church. Well, we functioned as Episcopalians for 10 years before we were officially confirmed. In the Episcopal church, if you attend regularly, you're on the mailing list, no matter whether you're been confirmed or not. But anyway, when Bill got the job at St. Anne's, we decided it was time for us to make the official change. And so we went to confirmation class at Holy Trinity. And we were confirmed into the Episcopal Church on the last day of Bill's tenure at Holy Trinity. So when he arrived at St. Anne's, he was now an official part of the Episcopal Church. Having grown up being churched, never having been shit upon by a church, spit upon if you prefer, we've never had any hurtful reason not to go to church. And in a document we produced for an earlier bishop of Atlanta, one of the things we said was that we decided, as far as religion goes, we will function in the church as long as the church doesn't do anything to hurt us. But if that ever happens, our first allegiance is to God, not an organized church. And of course, that's a very strong Baptist position, that everybody has a personal relationship with God. So we've never been hurt by the church, so we just continued. And of course, that's for Bill to have his career in the Episcopal Church. There's been no reason to leave. He did good work. We enjoyed what he was doing. He enjoyed what he was doing. The choir was good. We had good, straight friends there. We continued. Now we're getting past 69, or shall I push a little further?
As much as you want.
Bill resigned from St. Anne's in '83. He and the minister didn't get along, and I won't go into more detail than that. So it took a couple of years to find another parish that we felt comfortable in, but we ended up at Church of the Epiphany at Placidly and East Lake Drive, about halfway between Atlanta and Decatur. And the rector there was Claiborne Jones, one of the early female Episcopal priests. And Bill had done some substitute work there, so he knew her and the choir and the congregation. They thought we could be happy there. Well, so when we went to join, we had a conference with her and said, it's time for us to be a family in the eyes of the parish. We want one mailing, one pledge, that sort of thing. And all we thought we were outing ourselves to were the rector and the church treasurer. We hadn't been there but a couple of months until, at her instigation or suggestion, whatever, the adult education thing at Sunday school time put on this series of Sunday morning discussions of family lifestyles in the parish. And there was a lifestyle of the Sunday for 6 weeks. And the lifestyles were nuclear families, extended families, interracial families, gay and lesbian families, and people who level up. And each one had started with a little presentation by a clergy person or something of that sort, and then a panel discussion of the sorts of people of the day. So we were asked to appear on the gay and lesbian panel. How it came about is that the rector of the church one Saturday invited all the gays and lesbians she had identified for a little conference to find out who were willing to do it, and there were not very many that were willing, but we did, and it went very well. The question period even was easy. No antagonistic questions. There were some naive ones, but so what? But the point was, it was a good occasion, and as a result of that, we are now known throughout the parish as a gay couple. And as far as our benefits go, I will say that suddenly being sitting in the pew, being honest with all the people around you, created a serenity of being in church that I had never experienced before, almost euphoric. And as for, straight people in the church, a great many of them have gay relatives, and some of them want advice. So, we were resource people for that in the parish. Then when I came along to our 45th anniversary, the church was ready to have a Eucharist of Thanksgiving for our 45th anniversary. It was clearly not a marriage nor a blessing. That was made very clear. But we had 200 people there, gay and straight, big reception afterwards, big deal. So it's wonderful to go to a church where you're fully, absolutely welcome. And we're grateful.
Well, I'd like to just as we conclude, offer you the chance just to make any more comments or final remarks.
Lord,
Anything you can think of, or?
Well, the big difference, what hadn't been touched at all, and of course it's long after Stonewall, is that we're now in our 70s and we're beginning to be not as healthy as we were. We don't have the energy we had anymore. We decided a couple of years ago we can't maintain this house and property any longer, so we decided to look for a retirement home, and that is set up. We'll be moving at the end of 2005. We're in the process of getting rid of some of the stuff we can't take with us. We've been fortunate in selling a lot of the things without the first advertisement ever been published. The house is sold already with the provision we still live here till we move. We had a Steinway 7-foot grand piano, it's gone. We had a Flintrop 10-rack pipe organ here, it's gone. The guest bedroom furniture is committed to go. So those are all the big items. The rest of it is just small things, but we got twice as many as we'll have use for. But this is a big transition. And, well, not to be able to maintain the social life that we had before. Who knows what the social life after we get to the home. We do know straight people there that have been good friends, so I think we'll have an introduction to the people there. We will be the first, well, the original rule of the home was that for two people to live in one apartment, they had to be related by blood or marriage. They have gotten rid of that rule now. But before they got rid of the rule, a gay single could move there and be closeted or out, I suppose. So there are gay people there, gay singles there. But we will be their first gay couple. So, but we've been a pioneer in a lot of things.
Yes, you have.
Yeah. So, the only thing I hate is trauma, is the move itself. But surely we can find some gay friends to help.
I think you should be able to easily find some of that.
Well, except our closest gay friends are approaching, are advancing in age also. So whatever. Anyway, we hope to live a long time in the home. We picked a home that has terminal health care because, of course, we have no children to help out with that. We picked one in fairly close in downtown where we can keep our regular doctor and hospital where he practices and things like that, and close to Woodruff Arts Center, so as long as we're able, we can go to, you know, cultural things and things of that sort. Now, by the time we get there, we may sit at home most of the time. But, well, we're already buying tickets and decide, well, I don't feel like going tonight. Well, so be it. It's part of being old, I suppose.
Well,
goodbye, folks.
we will conclude, and I want to thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And I will stop these tapes.